The person sitting next to you at that coffee shop wearing a faded t-shirt driving a 10-year-old car might be worth more than your entire neighborhood combined. And you'd never know. That's the problem. Here's what's strange about this. We've all been trained, by ads, by social media, by movies, to associate wealth with visibility. The big house, the flashy car, the designer bag. And on some level, most of us just absorbed that. Accepted it as truth without ever questioning it. But the people who study real wealth, not the kind you see on Instagram, the kind that actually accumulates and stays, they'll tell you something different. The truly wealthy don't perform, they don't signal, they move quietly, and once you start to see the actual signs, you can't unsee them. I've been watching this for a long time, talking to people with serious money, reading the research, and what I found wasn't what I expected. The signs aren't loud, they're not obvious. Most of them, honestly, look like the opposite of wealth at first glance, which is probably why most people miss them entirely. So let's talk about what they actually look like, not the myths, the real ones. Before we get into the signs themselves, we need to talk about why you've been looking in the wrong places, because this isn't just about wealth, it's about how your brain was trained to see it. Think about the last time you assumed someone was doing well financially. What did you base that on? Their car, maybe, their clothes, the neighborhood they mentioned, the restaurant they suggested. We use these things as signals, constantly, automatically, and most of the time we don't even realize we're doing it. And here's the thing, that instinct isn't entirely wrong. Visible spending does tell you something. It just doesn't tell you what you think it tells you. What it usually tells you is that someone is willing to spend, not that they have something left over after the spending. Those are two completely different things. And we've been confusing them for most of our lives. There's actually a name for this in behavioral economics. It's called wealth signaling, and the uncomfortable truth is, it works both ways. Some people signal wealth they don't have, and some people hide wealth they do have. Both groups exist, both are larger than you'd think. The ones hiding it, that's who we're really talking about today. And the reason they hide it isn't always intentional. It's not always some strategic decision to stay under the radar. Sometimes it's just habit, mindset, a different relationship with money that developed over time. A relationship where money is a tool, not a trophy. Most people, when they get more money, spend more money. Almost immediately. It's almost reflexive. The raise comes in, the lifestyle adjusts, the bonus hits, and suddenly there's a new reason to upgrade something. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation, the tendency to return to a baseline level of satisfaction no matter what happens. You get the thing, you feel good briefly, then it becomes normal. Then you want the next thing. Quietly wealthy people, for the most part, broke that cycle somewhere, or maybe they never fell into it in the first place, and that's what makes them hard to spot. They're not playing the game everyone else is playing. They opted out, quietly, without making a big deal of it, and they just kept accumulating, while everyone else was performing. So the signs we're about to go through, they're not really about money, not directly, they're about behavior. About how a different relationship with money actually shows up in real life, in small choices, in the way someone talks or doesn't talk, in what they prioritize and what they couldn't care less about. Pay attention to the pattern, not just the individual signs. The pattern is where the real insight is. The first thing you notice, if you're paying attention, is that they never talk about money, not in the way most people do anyway. They don't mention what things cost. They don't bring up their salary unprompted. They don't casually drop what they paid for something, or how good a deal they got, or how expensive that trip was. That whole layer of conversation just isn't there. And at first that might seem like nothing, just a personality thing. But it's actually pretty consistent among people with real, serious money. There's no performance around it. No need to establish financial credibility in a room. They already know what they have. They don't need you to know. The people who talk about money the most are usually the ones most anxious about it. Second sign. And this one surprises people. They're extremely good at waiting, not patient in a passive, resigned way. Patient in a very deliberate, almost strategic way. They don't rush purchases. They don't get swept up in urgency. When something goes on sale, they don't feel the pull the same way. When a limited time offer appears, they pause instead of react. Because here's what most people don't realize. Urgency is a sales mechanism. It's designed to short-circuit your rational thinking and get you to act before you've properly decided. And quietly wealthy people, somewhere along the way, learn to recognize that feeling of urgency as a signal to slow down, not speed up. It sounds simple, but it isn't. Most people can't do it, not consistently. Third sign, they ask strange questions about money. Not strange in an awkward way. Strange in that they're asking about things most people don't think to ask about. They want to know the structure of something, not just the surface. How does this actually work? What's the real cost over time? What am I not being told here? They probe. They're curious in a quiet, specific way, and this comes from a real place. People who've spent time building wealth, real wealth, not inherited, not luck, they've usually made expensive mistakes at some point, and those mistakes taught them to ask questions before they're inside something, not after. Fourth, they own things that don't depreciate, or they're very deliberate about the things that do. This one takes a second to sink in. Most consumer spending, cars, electronics, clothes, most furniture, loses value from the moment you buy it. That's just the nature of it. And most people spend the majority of their discretionary income on exactly these things that are worth less tomorrow than today. Quietly wealthy people aren't perfect. They buy things that depreciate too, but they're aware of it. They think about it differently. They make a conscious decision. Okay, this loses value, and I'm okay with that because of X, instead of just not thinking about it at all. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Fifth sign, their home doesn't match their car, or their car doesn't match what you'd expect from their neighborhood. This is one of the more visible ones, once you know to look for it. There's often a mismatch somewhere, a very nice house with an ordinary car in the driveway, or a surprisingly modest house in an area where you'd expect something much bigger, or someone driving something old and unremarkable who clearly doesn't need to. The logic behind it is actually pretty straightforward. A car is a depreciating asset that costs money every year. Insurance, maintenance, fuel, registration. A home, in most cases, holds or builds value. So if you're thinking about your money like a system rather than a status signal, you might naturally overinvest in one and underinvest in the other. Most people do the reverse. Stretch for the car, settle for the house, and spend years wondering why the numbers never quite work. Sixth, they have very boring financial conversations. Not boring because they don't know anything. Boring because they're not interested in exciting. They're not chasing the hot stock tip. They're not asking about crypto strategies or the next big thing. They want to talk about compounding, about cost basis, about tax efficiency, about the dull, slow, reliable machinery of wealth over time. And I know that sounds unglamorous. But that's kind of the point. The financial world is full of noise. Products, strategies, trends. Almost all of it designed to generate fees or attention for someone else. The people who figured this out tend to tune most of it out. They get boring on purpose, because boring, in finance, is usually where the money actually is. Seventh sign, they're uncomfortable being owed favors. This one is subtle, easy to miss, but once you see it, it sticks. Quietly wealthy people tend to settle things quickly. If you paid for lunch, they'll get the next one without being asked. If someone did something for them, they'll find a way to return it. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures, just cleanly. They don't like open loops. They don't like being in someone's debt, even socially. And part of that is psychological. When you have money, the last thing you want is for people to feel like you owe them something. Because money changes relationships. They know that. They've probably seen it. So they keep things even. Keep things clean. It's almost a defensive habit. Eighth, they talk about time differently than most people. Not in a motivational poster way. Not time is your most valuable asset type stuff. More specific than that. They're protective of it in a way that's almost quiet and firm at the same time. They say no to things without over-explaining. They don't fill their schedule to look busy. They guard their attention like it's a limited resource because they understand at a pretty deep level that it is. Most people treat time as something that just happens to them, something they move through. Quietly, wealthy people treat it more like capital, something to be allocated deliberately. Ninth sign, they're not impressed by the things that impress most people. You mention a luxury brand, they don't react. You talk about an expensive restaurant, they're not particularly moved. Someone shows up in a new car. They notice it the same way they'd notice any other car. There's no spark of envy or admiration that most people feel automatically. And this isn't arrogance. It's not that they think they're above it. It's more that they've been around enough of it, or thought about it enough, that the novelty wore off a long time ago. The things that are supposed to signal success just don't carry the same charge for them, which, if you think about it, is actually a kind of freedom. Most of us are running towards something. They already stopped running. 10th, they maintain relationships with people across very different financial situations. They have a friend who's struggling, a colleague who's doing okay, someone in their circle who's doing extremely well, and they don't curate their relationships purely around status or proximity to success the way a lot of people unconsciously do. This matters more than it seems, because one of the quieter traps of wealth, especially new wealth, is that your social circle shifts. You start spending time only with people at your level or above. And slowly, without noticing, you lose perspective. You lose the ability to remember what normal feels like. Quietly wealthy people tend to hold on to that perspective, deliberately or not. 11th sign. They have an unusual relationship with risk, not fearless, not reckless, but calibrated. They can sit with uncertainty longer than most people can. They don't need immediate resolution. They can hold a position, financially, professionally, personally, through discomfort without panicking. And that ability? It's not just a personality trait. It's usually built through experience, through making decisions with real stakes and living with the outcomes. You don't get comfortable with risk by avoiding it. You get comfortable with it by surviving it enough times that it stops feeling like the end of the world. 12th, they never seem rushed about money decisions. Big purchases, investments, business decisions. They slow down when most people speed up. Someone pitches them something exciting, and instead of leaning in, they lean back. They ask for time. They want to think about it. They'll come back to you. And a lot of people read that as hesitation, as uncertainty. It's actually the opposite. It's discipline. It's the understanding that the best financial decisions are almost never made in the room where they're being sold to you. 13th. And this is the one that quietly changes how you see everything else. They're not trying to get rich. They're trying to stay free. That's the real shift. Somewhere in their thinking, maybe consciously, maybe not, the goal moved. It stopped being about accumulation for its own sake. It became about options, about never being forced into something, never being trapped by a bad job or a bad relationship or a bad situation because they couldn't afford to leave. That's what real wealth actually buys. Not the things, not the status, the exit, the option to say no, the ability to choose what happens next without money being the deciding factor. And here's what hits hardest about that. Most people spend their entire lives trying to look wealthy, and a quiet few spend their entire lives trying to become free. Those two paths, they look almost nothing alike, but only one of them actually gets you somewhere. So let's bring this back to you. You've just heard 13 signs, 13 quiet patterns, and maybe some of them felt familiar, not because you read about them somewhere, but because you recognize something in yourself, in someone you know, in the way you already think or the way you want to start thinking. Here's what I want to leave you with. Wealth, real wealth, doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. The people who've actually built something lasting, they're not performing it. They're living it, quietly, consistently, without an audience. And the most interesting thing, most of these signs have nothing to do with money, not directly. They're habits of mind, ways of seeing, ways of moving through the world, which means they're not locked behind a certain income level. They're not something you have to wait to earn. You can start thinking about time the way they think about time, today. You can start getting comfortable with discomfort, today. You can start asking better questions, moving slower on big decisions, keeping your goals a little quieter, today. The money, for a lot of people, comes after the mindset shifts, not before. And if none of this resonates, if you watched this whole thing and thought, that's just not how I want to live, that's completely valid too. There's no one right way, but at least now you've seen another way, a quieter way, and you can decide for yourself what you want to take from it. That's all I've got. If this made you think, share it with someone who needed to hear it. And if you want more of this kind of thing, the slow, careful stuff, the stuff that doesn't trend but actually sticks, you know where to find me.